When Putin launched the Ukraine invasion, he thought he held all of the cards. Ukraine could never survive, and even if Ukraine fought back, Russia had the money and manpower to see it through. But oh, how times have changed. Putin was playing checkers while Ukraine played a genius game of chess. Now Putin is trapped, stuck in an unwinnable scenario with no way out. The only thing that Putin can do to win in Ukraine now is the one thing that will break Russia completely. Russia can't afford to win or lose in Ukraine, and Putin knows it. As his army is shattered in Ukraine, having already lost almost 1.35 million soldiers, with many more to come as Russia continues a slow and arduous crawl through Ukrainian territory, Putin is faced with the one decision he never wanted to make. Mobilization is on the horizon. It has to be, and we'll tell you why soon. That possible new wave of mobilization is the only thing that is going to keep Russia ticking over in Ukraine as it loses soldiers at a record rate. The Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service highlights the problem Putin faces right off the bat. Experts emphasize that the mass withdrawal of Russians from the economy in conditions of a shortage of personnel will only worsen the situation in Russia, Ukraine's military intelligence says. And that's the big problem for Putin. Mobilization means stripping Russia of the manpower it needs to run a nation, also that Putin has enough meat to feed into the grinder in Ukraine. Putin is now stuck. Does he cripple his country to continue his war, or does he allow the Russian military to slowly wilt away under the hellfire of Ukrainian drones unleashed on them every day? Either way, Putin loses, and mobilization will be the catalyst for it all. United 24 media reports that Ukrainian intelligence has highlighted that Russia's economy is already in the early phases of recession, as a combination of stagnation and slowing activity grinds Russian production to a slow halt. Ukraine isn't lying. All of the economic indicators suggest that Russia is heading down the financial toilet, and it's Putin himself who dumped his own country down the crapper. The cracks are already appearing. In a May 8th report, Euronews noted that 20 rounds of sanctions against Russia have taken their toll. Between January and March, the Russian economy shrank by 0.3% per Russia's own Ministry of Economic Development. That result marks the first economic contraction seen in Russia since 2023, and it comes at a time when inflation is at 6%, interest rates are enormous, around 15%, and the Kremlin is creaking under a public deficit that has rocketed to $60 billion. That deficit will only continue to grow as Putin wages his war. Even Russia's leader has recognized the problems, though he did the most Putin-esque thing by accepting no responsibility. All he could do was call on his cronies to give him reasons why the trajectory of macroeconomic indicators is currently falling short of expectations. The answer to that question stares you in the face every morning when you look in the mirror, Putin. Assuming you have mirrors in your underground bunkers. These are all symptoms of so much more to come, especially if Putin follows through and mobilizes Russia to continue the fight in Ukraine. Just a couple of months before these figures were made public, The Economist argued that Russia had already entered what it calls the death zone. The Russian economy may not outright collapse, the outlet argued, but it will also never recover. That is the death zone, which The Economist notes is similar to the 8,000-meter altitude that can wreck a mountaineer's body. At that height, the human body consumes itself faster than it can be repaired. That's where Russia is right now, stuck in an unending cycle of wartime production that Putin ordered. Right now, the Russian economy is only just holding itself together in the present, as Putin makes orders that are leading to any prospect of future capacity being destroyed. Exports are down. Production has tanked. Putin can only tax Russia's ailing businesses and people so much as he fails to fill the gaps he has created in the country's budget. Russia has done all of this to itself, and the mobilization that now looms could be the death knell that symbolizes how Russia will never recover. The UK's Colonel Joby Rimmer has also warned of the destabilizing effect that Putin's bad decisions have on his country's future. In a May 13th speech at the UK delegation to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Rimmer laid it all out for the ignorant Putin to understand. Russia's own data underlines this trend. Economic growth has stalled, investment remains weak, and consumer demand is slowing. Fiscal pressures are intensifying as revenues decline and expenditure, particularly defense spending, continues to rise. Even where commodity revenues provide temporary relief, they do not address the deeper structural imbalances of a war-driven economic model that is approaching its limits, Rimmer declared. Putin won't listen. He can't. Even though he knows that these words make sense, he also realizes that the only way he can make any sort of progress toward repairing the shattered Russian economy is to pull his soldiers out of Ukraine. but Putin will never do that. Ending the special military operation without achieving any of his goals would be the death of the carefully cultivated image of the strongman that he has spent decades creating. How could Putin ever cast himself as Russia's protector when he has withdrawn from the biggest war Russia has seen in generations? It simply can't happen. And that is the trap that is pushing Putin ever closer to the mobilization that could spell the end of the Russian economy. Right now, Russia is stuck in a deadly feedback loop. To keep his war machine churning, Putin has to dedicate huge portions of Russia's domestic manpower to the military-industrial complex that he's created. That, in turn, weakens the civilian economy. Businesses can't produce to the scale needed for a healthy economy when the Kremlin and companies that it favors for wartime production are offering more money than ever for people to work in the factories or go to die on the front lines in Ukraine. Output is only sustained by increased defense spending, which props up employment and enables Putin to enact more political control. But that control comes at a cost. Russia is now so reliant on its defense sector that disengaging from the war could trigger an enormous political and economic backlash. There is no escaping this loop for Russia right now. But all of this is setting the stage for the horror that will come when Putin inevitably goes in the opposite direction. Rather than withdraw, Russia is on the verge of mobilizing. And when that happens, the war is lost for Russia for one big reason. The labor shortage that already exists in Russia will go critical, and Russia won't be able to recover. Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service highlights the main reasons why mobilization would amount to Putin falling into a war-ending trap of his own making. Even beyond taking away yet more employees from companies that aren't related to the war, Putin also strips Russia of its expertise when he mobilizes. A modern war machine doesn't just require meat to be sent to the front lines. It needs skilled personnel who are responsible for everything that goes on behind the scenes of the war machine. Technicians who maintain systems, communications, and electronic warfare systems will find themselves called to the front to do their work. They can still do their jobs, only they'll be doing them outside of Russia and inside the occupied territories, where Ukraine has been intensifying its strikes to the point where it basically doubled the number it launched in April when compared to March and continues to build up. In Russia, these skilled people face minimal risk, but in Ukraine, one drone will be all that it takes to strip Russia of another talented employee who will never come back and, just as importantly, never be able to pass on their knowledge to the next generation. And the kicker here is that Russia already knows that it has a labor shortage. In mid-April, the governor of Russia's central bank, Elvira Nabiullina, warned that Russia is facing a labor shortage for the first time in its modern history, which is happening as the country's economy overheats. She cited Russia's historically low unemployment rate of 2% as not being the good thing that it appears to be. It actually means that Russian businesses don't have a large enough pool of talent from which to pull, forcing increases in wages, which then increase production costs. Those remarks came on the back of a 1.8% contraction in Russia's economy during the first 2 months of 2026, and they amount to a warning delivered to Putin: don't mobilize, or it will be the death of Russia. But here's where it gets serious. The question has to be asked: will Russia mobilize? Before we answer that, there's a lot more where this comes from on The Military Show. If you're getting insight from the channel, make sure you subscribe so you never miss a video. So, will Russia mobilize? It's already started moving toward it, and the signs are all in place. Deep in the Ryazan region of Russia, the regional governor Pavel Malkov is feeling the pressure of Putin's never-ending thirst for more soldiers. He has signed an order that forces businesses that operate in Ryazan to identify potential candidates for military service who are currently under their employ. Companies with between 150 and 300 employees have to identify 2 individuals to serve in Ukraine. Those with 300 to 500 employees must offer up 3. And any company with more than 500 employees must provide the details of 5 employees. There's no 2 ways around it. This is stealth mobilization. And while Ryazan may be the first, the odds are that we're going to see a lot of other Russian regions signing similar orders as Putin demands more meat. And even earlier than this, Putin was setting up for mobilization. Back in December, Russia's leader signed a decree that calls up reservists for military training assemblies being held in 2026. The Kremlin has also prevented anybody from learning the 2 most important aspects of this decree, which are the number of reservists who will be called upon to train and how long this training will last. But we don't need to know those numbers. What we have here is Russia preparing its reservists for war, which is precisely what you would expect Putin to do when he's getting ready to mobilize. Fast forward to May 14th, and Euronews reported on another new law that Putin has put into place. Russia's State Duma has officially approved a law that allows Putin to deploy the Russian armed forces to protect Russian citizens abroad. That may not seem important on the surface. Russia's army has been in Ukraine since February 2022. But remember that Putin has always referred to his invasion as a special military operation, and has always avoided calling it a war. What this new law does is lay the groundwork for Putin to officially declare an invasion under the auspices of protecting Russian civilians. It's not a stretch to say that Russia could use this new law to mobilize. The Kyiv Independent reports that up to 800,000 Russians have moved to Crimea since it was illegally annexed in 2014. All that Putin has to do is claim these civilians need more protection than they already have, and that's it. Mobilization will become a necessity for that protection rather than for the special military operation. Putin is laying the groundwork for the mobilization to come, but what he doesn't realize is that mobilizing won't just plunge Russia into an economic chasm that is somehow even deeper than the one he's already fallen into. Losing labor is just one problem. Behind that major problem are several others that will combine to cripple Russia. Before we get to those problems, there's just one more sign that Putin is indeed on the brink of mobilization, whether he wants to be or not. According to the Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine's armed forces, Alexander Syrskyi, Russia's plan in 2026 is to recruit another 409,000 soldiers to its military via volunteer recruitment. That number comes with a lot of assumptions, which include Ukraine not being able to inflict more casualties on Russia than the Kremlin expects, and that recruitment inside Russia can be sustained at the level that the Kremlin anticipates. Neither of those assumptions seem to be working out for Putin right now. According to United 24 media, Russia lost around 130,000 soldiers during the first 4 months of 2026. Now, if those figures stay stable, that would amount to an annual loss of 390,000, which Russia's recruitment target more than covers. But that's the problem. There's nothing stable going on for Russia right now. As Putin renews his push into Ukraine's east as part of his faltering spring offensive, Russian casualties are mounting. March and April both saw Russia lose over 35,000 soldiers per month, amounting to 70,000 of the 130,000 already recorded this year. If Ukraine maintains that tempo for the rest of 2026, that amounts to 350,000 soldiers lost in 10 months, plus the 60,000 lost in January and February, for a total of 410,000 casualties. That's higher than Russia's recruitment target. And it assumes that the monthly casualties aren't going to climb high in the summer, when Russia will reach its peak in terms of the number of assaults it launches against Ukraine. That alone would be bad enough for Russia on the manpower front, but there's also another issue. 409,000 recruits in 2026 is just a target. The Kremlin can set that target, but it doesn't mean that Russia will reach it. And according to the deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, Russia is nowhere close to hitting the numbers that it needs to reach. Toward the end of March, Medvedev said that Russia was recruiting about 27,000 soldiers per month. Multiply that by 12 months and you get 324,000 recruits, which is 85,000 fewer than Russia wants. Combine sluggish recruitment with more casualties on the front and Russia gets a military manpower problem. The mobilization that will create a deeper labor shortage and more problems for the Russian economy is becoming almost inevitable. But we told you earlier that there are even more problems for Putin than the labor crisis he'll create if he pushes the trigger on mobilization. There are two more issues, and they can turn an already escalating situation into an absolute catastrophe for Russia as Putin scrambles to get out of the trap that he put himself in. First up, emigration. There will likely be a huge wave of Russian people getting out of the country as fast as possible if Putin mobilizes, Ukrainian intelligence reports. Russia has already experienced that sort of mass emigration, which was triggered by the combination of the launch of Putin's invasion and a partial mobilization instituted back in September 2022. According to The Bell, around 650,000 of those who fled Russia in the wake of these two incidents were still abroad by the summer of 2024. It's unlikely that many of those 650,000 have returned to Russia after spending over 2 years away. Some of those outside of this group who ran initially have returned, as United 24 media points out. But if Putin mobilizes fully, the odds are that they, along with hundreds of thousands, if not millions more, will try to get out of Dodge before their inevitable call-ups. How successful they'll be is a big question. Russia had already been caught confiscating the passports of some of its officials to prevent them from fleeing back in 2023, as Business Insider reported, and it wouldn't be a stretch to assume that the Kremlin has some form of emigration ban in the works to ensure Putin's mobilization is successful. But again, you get a trap. Either the Russians stay, perhaps forced by the Kremlin, and they get sent into Ukraine, which worsens the labor shortage, or hundreds of thousands emigrate and Putin gets the same result, a shattered domestic economy that can't survive the war that he continues to wage. The cost to the Russian economy mounts up. And speaking about costs, there's the second issue that will blindside Putin and his Kremlin cronies: Mobilizing hundreds of thousands of soldiers for the Ukraine war means paying through the nose to get those soldiers ready for a fight. In addition, Russia's financial difficulties should be highlighted. The budget deficit has already significantly exceeded planned levels, while the cost of supporting hundreds of thousands of mobilized personnel would require unsustainable expenditures, Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service declares. The service has a point. Every soldier that Russia mobilizes for Ukraine needs to be paid. They may not get the ludicrous signing bonuses that volunteer soldiers receive, which have reached almost $27,000 on top of the federally mandated minimum of $4,500 in some of Russia's regions. But each soldier gets a monthly salary. They need to be equipped. The money has to be spent on training and transportation. Across potentially hundreds of thousands of mobilized recruits, that all starts to add up for a country that is already struggling to pay for the war that Putin started. Again, it's all part of Russia being in the death zone. There is no escaping that spiral. As the Russian military grows through mobilization, the cost of maintaining that military skyrockets. But Putin's transformation of the Russian economy means that these costs can't be met. Non-military production craters even deeper as the manpower needed to sustain it gets stripped away. Those who are left behind can't fill the gaps that already exist, and they certainly won't be able to fill them later. The labor shortage just keeps getting worse. Mobilization would be the end of everything, but not in the way that Putin envisions. He is now trapped in a war that he can't afford to win or lose. If mobilization gets him what he wants in Ukraine, he leaves Russia as a shell of its former self. And if he chooses not to mobilize, then Ukraine will keep tearing through what Russia can send, and Putin loses anyway. And here's the worst part for Putin. He knows that all of this is coming. There's a deep crisis in Russia that is literally years in the making, and it's all being caused by Putin. He knows it, he's desperate to fix it, but he also knows that he can't do a thing about any of it, as every path available to him now just makes the crisis worse. Find out the real story behind Russia's unraveling in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show to see more of our analysis of the pain that Putin inflicts on his own country as he tries to conquer Ukraine. And thank you as always for watching.